The flood tide is a fantastic time in the low country for one of the most popular species in this country. It's a time when redfish start to show themselves more and you get the opportunity to hunt. Today's guest is going to walk us through his South Carolina program and the seasons and cycles of redfish. So this year you have a chance to experience that fishing story of a lifetime. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Caleb Andrews, Tales of the Tides guide and Eagle Scout, takes us into South Carolina today. You're going to find out how to plan the perfect trip around the tides, what tides to look for, the moon cycles. We're going to find out what some of his favorite materials are and how you can get your fly to stand out. We're also going to get into a little bit on the hunting the oyster flats and water clarity, why this is so important, and some areas as the seasons change where you can find these fish and still sight fish for them. Plus, we're going to talk a little bit about scent and how fish are smelling and how this can affect your hookup percentage. Here we go. Without further ado, Caleb Andrews from talesofthetides.com. How you doing, Caleb?
Doing well, thanks.
Yeah, what's going on with you right now? We are getting in close to April. It's always interesting because you're down in a part of the world that I always think is, has a little bit better weather. Although it's today up here, it's nice. But what's that looking like for you? When do you start your season? Is it going right now, or what do you have going?
So I would say that I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, and I would say that it's we're ultimately a red fishery. I would say by and large, and it's a year-round fishery. I kind of break it up into, you got your warm months fishing and then you got your cold months fishing. We're kind of transitioning into that warm month period or warm month time of the year. And so the redfish, the unique thing about Charleston's fishery and just the low country fishing in general is it's a very tidal fishery. And so we have these 5 to 7 foot tide swings that happen every 6.5 hours. And so by and large, that's kind of what you're going about trying to do, is you're fishing a tide swing basically. And that's how you go about your business. In the warm months, the redfish will push up into the grass on a high tide when the tide gets high enough to flood the grass, and the fish will kind of root around and dig for fiddler crabs, and their tails poke out of the water. And I would say that that's kind of the marquee, feature of the fly fish in the low country, basically, is the idea of these redfish getting up into the grass and, their tails poking out. And at that point, you know exactly where the fish is. And so that's a behavior that you get in the warmer months. You need a bigger tide for that. The tides obviously are a function of the moon. But that said, you can also have great time fishing for redfish in the winter too, because the water's a lot cleaner. The fish will school up. And so now you're fishing for these big schools of, 30 to 200 fish.
All right. Which aren't tailing as much?
I wouldn't say they're tailing as much. I mean, not to say that you're not going to find them tailing, but a lot of times you're seeing these big schools pushing through the water. I mean, at the end of the day, what I'm telling folks a lot of the time is these fish don't want to get seen, and they're really good at not being seen, but sometimes they're so big and they're so shallow that they can't help but be seen.
They can't help their fish. They're probably not just like fish, right? They're not as smart as maybe they could be. What are they hiding from? What's their big predator out there?
I think by and large in nature, you got dolphins, and you got birds, obviously.
Right, and they're used to it as probably I think of these pictures of you guys holding these giant redfish, and you're like, wow, that thing is, kind of out there, maybe up to the top of the food chain sort of thing. But really, they start small, right? So they're hiding, and probably they remember a lot about that, right? I don't know, I guess that's part of their life history, right? Trying to not get eaten.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the coolest parts about the redfish is it's one of your older living inshore species. And so they can live 35 plus years in age.
Yeah.
And what's cool about that is you can almost parallel it to humans' life cycle. And so when they're juvenile redfish, when they're, really before they're about 5 years old, it's just, they're just trying to make it. basically. And then by the time they hit about 35 inches or so, they'll start migrating offshore in the winters. And you can find these big bull redfish, out in the ocean off of wrecks and stuff like that. But in the warmer months, I think it's just kind of a behavioral thing that's kind of ingrained into them. Sometimes these bigger fish will float inshore. And so if you can get close to the ocean, you can have opportunities to sight fish these, bigger red drum. So,
Yeah, right. And what are the typically when you say warm months versus cold? What are those months?
so I think if it's interesting because I think if you look at just nature in general, we're kind of seeing some seasonal trends kind of shift along. But I would say that sometime between March and April, you kind of start hitting the warm months down here. And that's where the water temperature ultimately, because that's really by and large what's governing things is the water temperature. And so once I think that water temperature gets into the high 60s, low 70s, that's when you're starting to see them break into their, warm month pattern. And then when it drops below that, they're starting to get into their cold month patterns.
Gotcha. And what are they? And I'm trying to think about what they're doing. So right now it's kind of coming up to April, so things are kind of warming up. And are they getting what changes there? Does that get their feeding behaviors changed? Is that kind of what it is, or is there more something around spawning as well?
I think that there could be a like smaller spring spawn that you kind of see. It's well known that they spawn around these parts in the fall, but I think
Yep.
that you could see kind of like a smaller spring spawn. But yeah, at the end of the day, as it's warming up, you're going to start seeing more bait starting to show up. And so as the bait starts showing up more, the fish are going to be, getting more and more active. Additionally, what happens here is in the winter months, the water gets cooler. And so less stuff can grow in the water. The water gets a lot cleaner. The fish are schooled up together, as a function of safety in numbers.
Hmm.
As it starts warming up, you can start, algae's growing in the water, and it's not that it's bad
Yeah.
algae blooms
Right.
or anything like that, but just, the water's a lot more of a coffee color at that point, and so the fish will kind of break up, and they're not as schooled up as they'll be in the winter. Not to say that you won't find groups of fish at times, but they can go and roam around and do their thing, and
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. So basically, right now you're starting to get into more of it's warming up. It's going to start getting some color. When can you catch the tailing fish? When do you think, is there a peak time of that, or is there a bunch of months there where that's good?
there's a bunch of months that it's good. By and large, the way you find those tailing fish is you need a flood tide. And so to get a flood tide, the water has to get to a certain height, basically, to eclipse that grass line. And so what ends up happening is tides, like I said, are by and large are a function of the Earth's gravitational pull with the moon. And so on your full moons and your no moons, you have bigger tide swings. And then your half moons, you got your neap tides, smaller tide swings. And so if you're trying to plan a trip, look at the calendar and look at the moon. And I would say when you're looking at a 70 or so percent full moon, that's a decent time to start planning a flood tide around, or when you're on a, 30 or so percent no moon, probably a good time to start looking at a flood tide there. But
Mm-hmm.
then you got the wind, and so the wind is also, ever present in the game, and some directions of the wind are going to hold water in, and some directions of the wind are going to push water out. And so you kind of look at the tide charts, because one of the cool things about the tides is that that's the most predictable of all our weather patterns. So we can look, 8 months in advance, and we can have an
Yeah.
idea of what the tide's going to be.
Right.
What the wind's going to do 8 months from now, we have no clue. But if we kind of have an idea that this is the water level that we want, at the end of the day, it's a gamble, but we can gamble with more confidence, more information, and hopefully we're getting it right.
That's perfect. So as things when they start cooling down, is that kind of more? When does that start? Is that more of a September, October, November? When does it start changing again?
Yeah, I would say probably right about mid-November at this point is kind of you get the I would say fall's probably starting right about September. It's been interesting being here on the coast just because we've been very fortunate to kind of not have any of these severe hurricanes that have kind of hit Florida and other parts of the country. And so that's a big part of that, that time of the year is hopefully one of those doesn't come and crush you because if it does, then, that changes the game for a month or so and you're just trying to figure out the pattern. But
Right.
yeah, I would say that by and large, you get a push of the bull reds in September, October. By November, it's cooled off enough to where you're really starting to break into, the winter fishery and then you're kind of winter fishing through early March basically, and then things are warming up.
Then they warm up, then changes back. What is the and what home or what town are you in?
Charleston, South Carolina.
Okay. And what is it do you think? I mean, I'm not sure if you fished in other areas, and I think we've talked about a little bit on this, but the distribution. I mean, how is fishing the redfish in South Carolina different from the other parts in the U.S.? Whether you mentioned a few, Florida, Texas, all those places, or is it pretty similar? Like what you learn here, does it apply in some of those areas? And then also, and kind of what makes your area unique?
Yeah, so it's I mean, at the end of the day it's fishing, right? And so
Yeah.
there's certainly plenty of parallels that you can draw from one fishery or even, trying to compare one fish to another. But yeah, so I would say at the end of the day the thing that makes Charleston's red fishery more unique than any other is and I say Charleston, but it's really,
Yeah.
South Carolina, Georgia. Um Not North Carolina. So we can even touch on that at some
Yeah.
point. But really, I
Well, you
would
said the low
say,
country too. You said the low country, right? And so that's, and we could talk about that too. Where is there must be South Carolina that's a little bit different than the low country.
yeah. So really, it happens right about at Charleston. And so if you look at a map, you'll see Charleston Harbor's formed from three rivers coming together. You got the Wanda River, the Cooper River, and the Ashley River. And then as you go south, you'll see, you got the Stono River and so on and so forth. And so as you keep going south, there's a lot more inlets that really cut into the coast. But
Hmm.
then if you go above Charleston, there's not near as many inlets. The next one above us is the Santee River system. And then above the Santee River system, you got Georgetown. And then above Georgetown, you got, Murrells Inlet and all that. And so, and then you go up into North Carolina, and North Carolina doesn't have too many rivers really cutting into it. You have the Sound and Hatteras and all that, but it the coastline changes significantly as you go north of Charleston versus as you go south of Charleston.
I see. Okay. And the temperatures, right? The temperatures also change as you go up north.
Exactly. And so there's some great red fishing up in North Carolina and even, Chesapeake, Virginia, but the inshore red fishery I think gets tougher because those fish just,
Yeah.
there's only but so many places for those fish to be and as fishing gets more and more popular, how many people are fishing there, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So
Right. Right. And you're seeing that down there. Are you seeing the popularity increasing, more pressure on the fish and all that?
absolutely. And I think that's one of the cool things, but it's certainly cool. Redfish are very patternable.
Yeah, they're on the map, right? Everywhere, pretty much. Anywhere
Yeah.
you can find them, I'm sure it's growing.
And so I think that like at the end of the day, what I end up telling my clients a lot is what we're trying to do is we're trying to be in the right place at the right point in the tide. And when we're in the right place at the right point in the tide, that's where the fish are.
That's where they are. What happens when you get it's not a full moon or a new moon, it's kind of a half moon where they're maybe not getting these giant flood tides. What's that look like? Are you still able to get some action and then, or is it just, are you still seeing some tailing fish and it's just not as crazy? Or what's that look like? Would it be okay if you found the spot that wasn't the prime high tide?
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, at the end of the day, when we're fly fishing a lot, by and large, we're trying to sight fish them just because it's cool to see the fish and watch them eat your fly. Not to say that, like, I think there are times too where if you want to catch more fish, that if you start blind casting a bit more, that, maybe you're going to find someone, right?
Mm.
So at the end of the day, those in between tides, the fish are always gravitating towards structure. So that's what we're doing
Yep.
is on any given point in the tide, these fish are moving from one structure to another, be it a grass line or oyster bed or a sandbar or, whatever.
Yep.
But they've got this pattern that they like to go through where they're like, we feel comfortable here, and then we feel comfortable here, and then so on and so forth. And that's kind of their schedule. And on any given day, the wind's going to be blowing in some direction. And so some of the spots that, the fish are there, you can't get to or you can't see them. And so I think that's what you're ending up trying to do on any given tide. The way I'm going about my game is I'm trying to get us the best seeing conditions possible so that we can see these fish. If they tail, you see the tail and that there he is. Polarized sunglasses go a long way to being able to see the fish, you know, underwater. Um, Oysters are a structure that they really enjoy hanging out on. I think it's a good source for them to, it's a good structure for them to be able to eat food and then also, be in a position where they feel like, they're more comfortable and so they're not having to worry about getting eaten as much. And the nice thing about oysters is they're a filter organism. So these oysters will clean the water around them a bit. So you can kind of see these fish sitting on the oysters because the water around this little patch of oysters is clean. And then, you shuffle off of it 2 yards and it's coffee. So,
Right. Oh, wow. That's cool. So some of these times in the warmer months where it's coffee, you can find these oyster beds and it's clear enough where you can see the fish and they can see your fly and you can still, I don't know, are they still, and they'd be tailing, right? Potentially.
yeah, they might tail on the oysters, but there's 1 second that his tail was up. Hope you were looking there, but you work around them slow and you look, and sometimes they're sticking out like a sore thumb.
This year, I ventured into the heart of eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton territory where the fish were larger than life and the waters held the secrets of the best fly fishing out west. With crystal clear rivers like the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Snake and enough lakes to keep you going all year long, make your way to Yellowstone Teton territory and embark on a journey to one of North America's finest fly fishing destinations. It's time to experience eastern Idaho for yourself and support this podcast at the same time. If you're looking for a world-class fly fishing experience, it's time to check out Mountain Waters Resort. Nestled along Newfoundland's legendary Portland Creek, this spot has a history that runs as deep as the Atlantic salmon that call it home. Once a fly fishing retreat for the great Lee Wolf, today it's your turn to step into these historic waters and swing up your salmon this year. You can head over to wetflyswing.com/mountainwaters right now and make it happen. That's wetflyswing.com/mountainwaters. Let's get out there today. So is that something where you're focusing? Do you have all these oyster beds mapped? Is it something where any given day you be like, all right, we're heading out to that oyster bed again?
Yeah. There's certainly banks that I'm like, they like this bank. Like, let's work down this bank. We got good visibility. We can put the sun at our back and, let's see what we see.
That's sweet. And then when you're in there and then the fly, are you just tossing the similar flies that you'd toss anywhere else, or do you have different specific patterns in those areas?
Yeah, so I'm a big fly tire. That's something that I really enjoy about the whole fly fishing game is I like the act of being able to go out and think I learned something and then go home and try and recreate it on the vise. And so by and large, I think that I tie a lot of flies based on different sink rates. And don't get me wrong, I'm trying to get them to imitate shrimp or minnows or crabs or whatever. But the more I'm out there, the more I observe these fish and I see them sitting in spots. And it's like, okay, I need a fly that's going to be an easy fly to cast and I can throw it, 60 feet or whatever, but I also want it to land soft, and I want it to sink really slow so that they have some time to look at it, or sometimes I want it to, drop to the bottom because they're looking down or whatever. So I enjoy playing around with that and
Mm-hmm.
infinite possibilities, trying to
Right.
get the right thing that, never gets turned down or whatever.
Yeah. What's a couple of the patterns that you're using out there typically?
I would probably, my favorite fly is like a derivative of the Borsky slider. Um,
Okay.
you
Borsky
know,
slider.
tie a little rabbit on a Borsky slider and some bead chain eyes and a weed guard, and I would say that's probably one of my go-tos.
Yeah, I say the Borsky slider. Okay, yeah, it's just kind of a is that deer hair mostly you're using?
Yeah, it's a deer hair, rabbit, and flash. Not too much to it. Kind of suspends in the water.
Yeah, we heard we had Gunnar Bramer on recently. He was talking more about up north fishing, but he was talking about he loves tying flies too, some of the really big stuff. And he was saying how he really loves the natural material versus the synthetic because it's easier to cast. It's just overall there's no question to him. Do you find that you like tying the more of the traditional natural stuff versus the synthetics, or do you use both?
I use both. I think both have their place. I like the natural materials because I think you're able to get some properties from the natural materials that they're not able to emulate in synthetics. But then, I also think that the way I've looked for bait plenty of times, and the way I find it a lot of the time is I see the bait flashing in the water. And so I think that flash is something that certainly helps your fly look a lot more realistic. I think that if the old timers had as much flash as we did now, we would see more flash in some of the old classic patterns.
Yeah,
But I do think that at the end of the day, there's properties that you get from these natural
from both.
materials that are
Yeah.
cool. And so
What are some of those? Do you know much of the? Well, we haven't really got into your history, but I know you have a really long background in fly fishing. But do you know some of those old traditional patterns? Because I think it might. Now I think about old, right? It's funny. It's all relative. As you get older, you're like, well, man, those '80s days back in the 1980s, that was actually, I guess, that is old, right? That is old now. And there was stuff back then, right? You always had Flashaboo, you had some of these materials, but have things changed a lot on the flash? Are there a lot of things that other than crystal flash that people are using that are good, that are kind of newer materials?
oh yeah, yeah. I'd say that there's, I mean, there's tons and tons of synthetics now. You got all these EPs and all that jazz, and craft furs, all that stuff. Great materials, plenty of movement in the water. But yeah, again, there's something to be said about the way a chicken feather moves in the water that or the way a rabbit strip or marabou moves in the water. And so I think that there are times that it's you can tie these flies that are great because you can put in both old materials and new materials, where these new materials maybe they don't move quite as good as the old materials do, but they're a lot more durable. And
Right,
so
that's
you
true.
catch 5 fish on a marabou fly, maybe all that marabou's ripped out at that point, and it's no longer a usable fly. But you tie a little bit of craft fur in with the marabou, and that fly's life just doubled. So
Yeah, there you go. That's it. So that's a big bonus. And do you find that so that's one thing. So they're going to be more durable for the most part. And are they kind of as those flies get chopped up, are they still working as effectively as the fresh fly out of the box?
yeah, I mean, I think that there are times that I've certainly had buddies argue that some of these, a fly that's been eaten is a lot more likely to be eaten again. And I almost wonder if it's just because that fly now smells.
Oh,
Um,
right. Yeah, that's a good point.
because I think that the way saltwater fish find their food, first and foremost, maybe it's all fish, but I think that it's an element of scent first. Then I think it's like percussion, vibrations in the water. And then lastly, I think it's sight. And
Yeah.
so that kind of goes into my fly design, et cetera, et cetera. But I've questioned if maybe they prefer the natural materials at times because the natural materials still have just a little bit of, scent to them. And so,
Yeah, they don't have the plastic smell, the new car smell, right? They're actually natural.
yeah, the new car smell isn't near as good as the old dead deer smell.
Yeah, the old dead deer, right? That's pretty awesome. And so smell, and you said and sight, smell, vibration, and then sight is kind of the last.
Yeah, that's my thoughts at least.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think that probably does apply to a lot of species because you think about it, there's lots of times where you're out there and you said it yourself, I'm sure this happens, the water is not clear at all, and you're still hooking into fish. And you're like, wow, how did that fish see the fly? I could barely even see it. He barely. Do you find that, like, does it get to a point sometimes when the turbidity is too high or it's just, super coffee and you can't fish at all? Or are you guys out there in all conditions?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you can always go. I would say that there's never an instance where I'm like well, maybe not never.
Yeah.
You're trying to find clean water at the end of the day.
That's the key, right? The cleaner, the better.
Yeah, go try and find the best water you can. But at the end of the day, you're going to get what you get. And, if it's dark water, a lot of the time I'm going to throw a dark fly that gives me a profile in the water, to put more flash in it to make it reflect more light. There's all sorts of different thoughts that you can kind of apply to trying to solve the problem, if you will.
Okay. So I guess going back on it, and you have, I was looking at, I think a little bit in your background that there's something there talking about like conventional fishing. Do you still incorporate some of that? And I know we haven't talked much about some of the nonprofit stuff you do, but is that something you're doing out there, mixing that in? Or you got me thinking when you mentioned the smell of the fly.
Yeah, so kind of, I mean, the way it went for me is I grew up a fly fisherman, and like fly fishing was the only way I knew.
And this was up north. Was this up in Virginia?
This was in Virginia. There did this fly fishing camp with my dad, the Brotherhood of the Jungle Cock.
Oh, wow. I think I've heard of that before. The Brotherhood of the Jungle. Is this a pretty big group that's out there?
It's probably smaller now, but it was the Federation of Fly Fishers, at least somewhat affiliated with it. And basically, it was a father's going to take his son fly fishing for a weekend. And so they did this. There was two chapters, one up in Michigan and one in Maryland. We did the Maryland chapter.
Yeah. Is it still out there?
I couldn't tell you. I know it was for a good while. I know when at some point the Federation for Fly Fishers became the International Fly Fishing whatever, and so yeah, I honestly couldn't speak to it.
Yeah, there's still a website, the Brotherhood of the Jungle Cock, organized in Maryland, 1940. There's a patch there.
So that's kind of how it started. Always fly fishing for trout. Ended up going to school at the University of Tennessee. I studied engineering there. By the time I got done with school, I had been doing a bit of fishing. I kind of went into engineering with the thought process that I would work my way into the outdoors industry via the engineering background.
Mm-hmm. Like designing products and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought. I actually almost got a job with Rio out of school designing fly line, which would have been cool. But one thing led to another, and engineering job moved me to South Carolina, and then went fly fishing for redfish with a buddy of mine, and I was like, man, that's where it's at. And so
yeah,
figured I'd move to Charleston and find an engineering job there, and then it was slower finding an engineering job on the coast than I expected. And so I was like, you know what? Like, we're here. Maybe
we'll buy a boat.
Yeah. Well, I had already bought a boat at that point. I was fishing around a lot, and one thing led to another. And what ended up happening for me is a guy that I fly fished a lot with got hired by a charter company down here, Redfin Charters, and I ended up taking a job with them. And then taking a job with them, I ended up basically getting immersed into the bait fishing charter game, bait fishing for redfish. And so in doing that, I'm catching a lot more fish than I was when I was fly fishing. And so I'm, just taking notes basically the whole time, and you can draw parallels between the
Sure.
two. And so one thing led to another. And
Huh.
so, yeah, that's kind of,
Yeah. We've heard that and we've talked about that quite a bit, the parallels, whether it's, trout fishing for streamers or steelhead or you name the species. There's probably any species, there's conventional fishing. And then in some of the people that are the best people out there seem to be the people that have that conventional background or at least know people and talk to them. What do you think is is there a few things you've learned from the conventional that you apply, with the fly for redfish?
yeah, for sure. I think that, like we said, the scent thing's certainly a big part of it.
Mm.
So,
But is there scenting? Because you hear this is like the extreme. I don't think some people do this, right? But scenting the fly, right? There's some places where people have scented a fly. Is that something that people do out there, or what's that look like?
I'm sure they do. I mean, it's one of those things where, unspoken, and it's kind of,
Yeah, it
it's
might not
kind
even
of,
be legal in some places because it's kind of bait, right? It is bait, really, if you're adding scent to your fly.
yeah, I guess. I mean, is it bait when you put scent on an artificial lure and start pitching around? I don't know.
Oh, right, right, right. Yep.
But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like having done the bait fishing a bit, if there are times that you put a piece of cup mullet on the bottom and it's out fishing a live mullet that's sitting right beside it.
Mm,
And it's just because they can smell that bloody piece of mullet right there, and
yeah.
it's easy. Like,
Right.
just pick the thing up and the rod goes off. And so, yeah, I think that, that's one of the cool things that you can kind of learn from the bait fishing aspect of it is you're going to catch more fish more quickly. So you can sharpen your learning curve. Um, Catching them on the fly rod's a whole lot cooler and a whole lot more challenging, but I don't know that anyone ever started fly fishing for fish because they wanted to catch more fish.
Right. That's true. So if you went out there today, or yeah, any day, you're probably going to have a better chance of catching more fish with conventional tackle.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, because you can get down to the fish better, and you could use. Can you use bait? Can you use actually live bait for redfish and stuff like, or just any type of bait?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, you can do
yep,
whatever.
yeah. And so, I mean, there are times where the question is, do we want to fly fish or do we want to catch fish? Because it's going to be challenging to do both. But I think that's the fun part about fly fishing. At the end of the day, is it's challenging, and it's a team dynamic out there. And I'd rather fly fish any day than bait fish, but it's also it's a progression of the game, right? So
Yeah, definitely. Nice. Okay. I guess getting back to, I'm always thinking, the timing, the trip. So if somebody wanted to find more of those tailing fish, you'd shoot for the warmer months. You'd shoot for, either the full moon or no new moon where you have those bigger flood tides. So you're in there. What is it once you get down? You talked a little about the oyster beds, I guess. But what does that look like once you're down on the water, you find the fish and you're kind of making that cast? Talk about that moment a little bit. What does that look like for you?
So the reason why I say the tailing fish is kind of your ideal scenario is because one, when you see them, it's pretty easy to see them. And two, I think my favorite part of fishing as an angler is the adrenaline dump that you get when you see a fish and you're hunting that fish. That's probably my favorite part of the whole game is
Yeah.
like the adrenaline dump when before it's even happened, but like you think that it's going to happen. And so that's why I think the tailing fish is so cool because a lot of times you can see them from, 100 yards away. And now you got 2 minutes of trying to get to that fish. And he's so shallow that he can't really disappear on you, hopefully.
Oh, right.
But like you've got that adrenaline pumping the whole time. And that's what's cool about
That's
it.
awesome. Right. And then you're sneaking. If he is 100 yards out, are you just kind of pulling yourself? How does that look like? What does that look like in the perfect situation where you have to make some distance on him?
Pull fast and pull quietly.
Yeah. You get good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where quieter you are, probably the faster you are too. Once they know you're there, they don't want to play the game.
Yeah. Say you're 100 yards out. How close are you trying to get? Do you just keep trying to get closer and closer, or do you say I'm going to get to 40, 40 feet or 60 feet and be good with it?
I mean, you can get really close to them sometimes.
Oh, you can? Like how
It's
close?
all different, and I think that that's part of the fun thing in the guiding is you're trying to figure out your angler and figure out, what they're capable of doing well. And so, if the guy can only throw a 20-foot cast, I guess we got to get to 20 feet. But
Right.
if you're a good angler and you can throw 60 feet of line, then we can kind of play the game a little bit more. And maybe we are going to throw a 60-foot shot at it just because it's more fun. But like, we can also kind of take our time and maybe we're able to get 40 feet from them and we got a slam dunk at that point.
Oh, yeah. Once you're 40 feet. Yep. When you make that cast, if he's tailing, what's the fly? You talked about a little bit on the weight. What is that fly you're likely dropping in there? It probably depends a little bit on well, he's in shallow water, right? So do you have something that's got a little bit of weight or no weight?
I like something with just a little bit of weight. I mean, you can throw a lot of the times you can show them about anything. I mean, half the time with a lot of guys that do it joke around, half the time they'll eat a shoestring if you put it in front of them. So at the end of the day, I think what's happening is they're up in the grass feeding. That's why they're there. And so if you can put something in front of them and they don't know how it got there, they're like, I guess I'm supposed to eat that thing.
Oh, right. Yeah. Even if it's not food, it just could be anything. They're curious a little bit.
Yeah, a grasshopper hops in front of them. They're probably not eating a ton of grasshoppers, but like if it's there, why not?
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. These aren't permit, right? This is the difference.
Yeah, sometimes they identify as permit, but yeah, by and large, they're redfish. And I think that a redfish is going to eat what's in front of them. However, there are the ones that identify as permit, and then you're just scratching your head.
Stonefly Nets makes nets with soul, each one handcrafted to stand out and built to last. When you spend time on the water, your gear matters, and these are the kinds of nets you can pass down for generations. I know my Stonefly net goes with me everywhere and has seen the abuse, but it seems to get better each day I'm on the water. Every net is shaped from premium hardwoods, balanced by hand, and finished to handle a lifetime of use. We all love a big fish story, but it's the moments around it that stick. Stonefly helps turn every one of those into something you'll remember. Head over to stoneflynets.com right now to see what stories you can create with this beautiful custom landing net. That's stoneflynets.com. What is you mentioned somebody that maybe can't cast as far. What's the most common? You get somebody pretty new on the boat. What's the biggest struggle new anglers have out there? Is casting the biggest one, and then what other struggles do you see?
Yeah, I would say casting is always going to be the biggest one. I mean, certainly tough at times if you're fishing with, someone that's a little older. Sometimes it's harder for them to see the fish. I try and bring extra pairs of polarized glasses with me to help folks out. But yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the game as well as a guide is you're trying to articulate to them, this is how I expect things to go. And so this is what I want you to anticipate. And
Right.
sometimes that message gets received better than others. But, that's part of the cool thing about fishing with guides multiple times is, your rapport gets better and better. And, a lot of times you're catching more fish the more times you fish with a guide than you are, a one-off. So.
Yep, I see it. And I saw a picture of your boat out there, but what's your the boat? Do you have the same boat that you pick up your first boat, or is this something where you get new boats as you go?
I actually got the same boat I started with, basically. I mean, I started with a John boat, but I bought a 1998 Dolphin Super Skiff back in 2012, I want to say. And I've just keep repowering it, repainting it. It's a solid boat. It does everything pretty well. There's a lot of great new boats out there, but they're also expensive. I got mine on a blue collar deal, and so it floats good, it pulls good, and it'd be nice if it got a little shallower, but
yeah, it's got a little bit of a. So is that the difference? Some of these other boats that I guess if you get a boat that can go shallow, then it probably loses on some other things, right? Maybe going in heavier water, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, engineering law 101 is you don't get something for nothing.
Yeah, that's we've heard that talk about fly rods, and I always forget this, but you can't have the fastest, most durable, whatever the third thing, right, on fly rods. You got to
Yeah,
pick. Yeah.
you're always going to have to sacrifice a little something, and maybe it's cost is the third thing, right? So like
Yeah.
maybe you know, you want the baddest skiff out there, well, you're paying 100 grand for it.
Yeah. Is that what it? So that's what it's going to cost you for that. You get the best skiff for what you do. It's going to be 100K.
Probably something like that. I mean, I think Chittum's is Hal Chittum's probably putting out, well, not probably, he's putting out the best boat out there right now, but
Yeah.
it's also expensive. So
That's interesting because, and why do you think, why is that boat the best one?
I think it's the combination of everything. I mean, the dude's a legendary boat builder, and then they've got the best materials going into it. And so I would say that's it at the end of the day.
Yeah. The design is probably as dialed in as it gets. Is it a boat that has a more less V than your boat, or is it more of a flatter bottom?
Yeah, I mean, they've got all different degrees on them now and all that. I mean,
Whatever you want.
yeah, I mean, for the most part.
Yeah, there you go. It's interesting that as things get more expensive, the boat that, just look at cars and trucks. I mean, how much more they cost. It seems like everything costs a lot more these days.
Oh, exactly. But my boat floats and I don't mind pulling it right through or over an oyster. So like that's the nice
Oh,
thing is
it's more durable.
well, less heartbreak too.
Yeah.
You start putting scratches in $100,000 boat, it cuts a little deeper than
That's true. Yeah. What are those things on the boat? So what are the give? We talked about with fly rods, but what are the things? If you had to say, are there three things you can only get one or two of those things, or what are those things? You got probably weight.
Yeah, you got I think I mean what we're all looking for is we're looking for something that's gonna float and spit basically. We want it to ride in 4 foot seas. We want it to be cost efficient, and then we want it to be dry. I think another one is quiet. We want it to
Oh,
be
right.
quiet. And so like you've got all these things that are going into it, and at the end of the day, what do you want to sacrifice? I've had guys ask me like, why don't you see more aluminum boats in the
Yeah.
Charleston area?
Yeah. Why
And
don't
I
you?
think it's going to be a louder boat. And so, but that's part of the cool thing about it all is there, plenty of designs that have yet to come about to, try and tackle the same old problem. So,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. No, it's cool. I always love the boat talk, whether it's talking about skiffs or rafts, you name it. It's always interesting because it is that you mentioned, the engineering is interesting because you've been through that, I mean,
yeah, I
that's what you
think
do.
that's one of the fun things I've enjoyed with my boat is owning it as long as I have. I kind of go through renditions of trying to make the thing more and more efficient. When I first got it, one of the things I always said, space is a premium on a boat, and you're never going to get more of that. So, like, how can you multi-purpose as much of everything in the boat as possible so that you're bringing it on board because it serves 5 different purposes, therefore it's worthy of taking up that space.
Is that how your boat, do you have it, compartments through there? It's all pretty much fully like decked, but, standing
uh
on it. Yeah.
so my boat, I believe, was an old tiller skiff, and then it eventually got converted over into a side console, and I really enjoy the side console layout because it leaves the center of the boat more wide open so you can,
Oh,
fit
right.
more stuff and all that. But there's no real storage on my boat.
Yeah, there's no storage. You don't have any compartments below where
I
people are
don't.
standing.
Yeah, I bring dry bags. There's one hatch, and that's where the gas tank is, and I can kind of jam a little bit of other stuff up in there. But most of the spaces, or at least the quote unquote dry space, is spoken for, and so we're filling up dry bags and stuff. But it's been cool. Like I built a lean bar system for the boat, and
Oh,
that's
nice.
kind of fun because if you're fishing with someone that's older, you can they now can feel a little bit more stable on the
Sure.
bow, and if you're sight fishing, I found that the higher up you get, the better you can see, the better vantage point you have, and so you stand on the cooler. Sometimes that cooler rocks, but then you can put that lean bar in and feel a lot more stable up there, and so
Wow. Yeah, this is awesome. It sounds like you got it pretty dialed in. Well, let's kind of start to take it out of here. We've been doing something. You mentioned casting a little bit. We have a casting challenge we've been doing where we're trying to get some tips on casting, and we've talked a lot about. We've had some expert instructors on here, and just had Bruce Richards on talking about his basics, essentials of casting as well. But today, this one's presented by Togiak River Lodge. We're doing a trip down there this summer, but also they're giving away a custom fly rod that Jordan and Zach's dad built. So the challenge is we're getting everybody to do some tips that are from our guests. So for you, I think one of the things we hear about with the saltwater, or just in casting in general, is that a full action rod can be better for especially a new angler. But there are times when fast action is good, right? Especially where you're at. Talk about that a little bit. What would be your casting tip for somebody? They're coming on, they're getting ready to fish with you. What are you telling them, to kind of have more success?
So I think probably the issue most people run into, at least in most instances, is they're not letting the rod load up with the line.
Right.
And so I think that that's where a faster action rod will help folks in saltwater fly fishing, because by and large, you're having to contend with that wind too. And so with the wind, the wind's blowing in some direction. You got to let that line roll out either in front of you or behind you to load that rod up. And if it's a, full action rod, it's going to just take longer for that to happen.
Yep.
A faster rod, it's going to happen faster. So I think that can help folks out. But yeah.
Yeah, so that is a big one. What is your, do you have like rod wise, what's your typical rod kind of length, weight, and do you have some brands that you like to use?
I mean, your go-to is probably a 9-foot 8 weight.
Yep.
And I would say, a 9-foot 8 fast action rod. There's, tons of good ones.
Yeah, everybody's got a good, 9-foot 8 weight is pretty common, right?
I started throwing a couple of years ago, a lot more 9 weights. And I really like the 9 weights because they kind of throw more similar to an 8 weight, but it punches through the wind a lot like a 10 weight. So you can kind of, if you've got a less skilled caster, I'll a lot of times give them a 9 weight and they can throw it, 5-10 feet further than they can throw the 8 weight, just because it's loading up a little bit harder, but it's not quite heavy enough to where like you start getting those bigger rods and bigger reels. It's getting heavier on the angler, and it's just harder for them to put enough force into that rod to get it to load up anyways. So, that's why the 9 weight's kind of one of my more favorite rods for this area.
So the heavier weight gives you a little more, it actually helps kind of load it up even more a little bit and deal with the wind and all that.
I think so.
Okay. And what about just on generally, so if we had like, a few tips, somebody just red fishing in general, you're going to leave them with, talk to somebody on the phone here, or they're coming on your boat tomorrow. What are like 2 or 3 things you're telling them?
I would say ultimately we want to, a good pair of polarized sunglasses and a hat is going to be important for us. And then I think that just kind of getting our clocks coordinated so that we're looking the same directions when we're calling shots and stuff goes a long way.
Yeah. So being in tune. How do you get those people in tune with you when if somebody's brand new, you haven't been with them before, you're going out there and you're talking about 10 and 2 and all that stuff? How do you get ready? Because is it something where you might some days only have one good shot at a nice fish, or are you potentially getting multiple shots, or what's that look like?
I mean, for me, that's kind of how I evaluate the day is how many fish did we see? How many fish did we really get shots at? And then how many fish did we catch? And so somewhere in that is the equation of a good day. But as far as kind of taking the angler, a new angler, I'll get on the bow. Have no problem kind of doing a quick demo on casting, to where I think if you're coming from a freshwater background, I had never done a lot of backhand casting. And so I think a backhand cast certainly goes a long way in the saltwater, just because we never know how we're going to have to approach an area based on the wind. And so sometimes it's necessary for our success to have a good backhand. But I know that generally everyone wants to throw an overhand. So like
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get them the best shot that I think they can throw. And then, the more shots you can throw, the more options I have. And that's kind of how we'll go about playing the day.
Do you, on your backhand cast, are you as accurate as you are with your forward cast?
No.
No. And is that hard to get? How far away are you? Because I feel like I'm not either. But there's some times where you make that backhand cast, you're like, oh man, that was perfect.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say I practice it just as much as the forehand cast, and I think that if I'm a B caster on my forehand, then I'm a B minus on my backhand.
Yeah, pretty close.
But yeah, I think that ultimately, when I'm talking to new anglers and trying to explain the backhand cast to them, I'm like, it's just the reciprocal of your forehand cast. So, throw a forehand cast the opposite direction and let it go on the backhand, and now we've got a good backhand cast.
Yeah.
So that seems helpful at times.
Yeah, it's the same. That's the cool thing about it. The back cast, the forward cast, essentially they're identical. You're kind of setting it up, right? But you should be kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah,
so
just casting on a different plane at that point. So
yeah, nice. Well, I got a couple of random ones here, and then we'll take it out of here. You mentioned the Eagle Scout was, I think, interesting. It sounds like that had a pretty large influence on you. I remember back in the day, it was Cub Scouts for me, so I didn't quite make it to the Eagle. But what was that? Take us back there. Was that something that you did for quite a while?
Yeah, it was just something that I got into, and I had a couple guys that were my age, and we kind of went through it together and kind of enjoyed the whole aspect of hiking and camping and all that, and in the outdoors. And yeah, I think having done the Brotherhood of the Jungle Cock fly fishing camp, that kind of inspired the idea of doing a fly fishing camp for the Eagle Scout project. And so yeah.
So that's it. So that was. I mean, how long is that typically? When did you get out of it? Is that kids are typically taking that in high school, or when would you wrap it up?
So you got to get Eagle Scout before you turn 18. So
okay.
I did that when I was my Eagle Scout project. I did when I was 17, and I'm 38 now. So
yeah. So you did it. So you did it when you're 17, and then what happens after you turn 18? Do people stay in it for a long time?
No, not really. After that, you kind of, if you go into the military, apparently, you can get some credentials for that.
Oh, okay.
Some to accomplish, but yeah.
Right. That's it. Okay. So basically that's it after you become an adult. No more Eagle Scouts there. Okay. And when you mentioned also on the, what was the group you were working with as, the nonprofit?
Therapeutic Adventures.
Yeah, and what was your project, your Eagle Scout project that you worked on?
So it was Adaptive Anglers on the Fly is kind of what we called it, and basically teamed up with Therapeutic Adventures, who is a nonprofit that takes folks into the outdoors and folks with different handicaps or disabilities into the outdoors and kind of takes them skiing or paddle sports and fly fishing was the one that kind of I went after. And so what I had done was for the Eagle Scout project, the project has to get approved by a committee. And so I went to the committee and I told them I'm going to put on a fly fishing camp for folks with different disabilities. And they were like, that's all well and good, but it needs to have a lasting effect. And while this is a great thing, we don't know that it's going to have enough lasting effect. And so I'm like, well, tell that to the people that are doing it. But what my thought process was at that point, what I'll do is I'll put on the camp and I'll write a manual that's the step-by-step as to how I went about putting on the camp. And now you've got a hard copy of how to do it. So now it's lasting.
Mm-hmm.
And so that got approved. And so I wrote a manual about the camp, put on the camp, and then the nonprofit picked it up and basically has been doing it for the past 20 years. So
right, and so they're doing that same like manual probably, right? Some form of that
yeah.
They're still doing.
Yep.
That's pretty amazing. And are you still connected with that, or is that just, it's all on its own thing now?
I certainly stay connected, but it's self-sustaining.
Cool. Well, that's, I mean, I think, I guess, before we get out of here, anything else we want to talk about your program, what you have going as far as if people are interested in, checking in with you?
No, my charter company is called Tales of the Tides. The reason it's called Tales of the Tides is I always enjoyed this Thoreau quote, which is basically most people fish their entire lives only to realize it wasn't the fish they're in pursuit of.
Yep.
And so I always enjoyed that. And I've thought to myself, if that's the case, if most people fish their entire lives only to realize it wasn't the fish they were in pursuit of,
Right.
then what were they in pursuit of? And what I've come up with is I think we're in pursuit of a good story. Don't get me wrong, a lot of my best fishing stories, I'll talk about a fish somewhere in the story. However, if you go fishing enough, probably your best fishing stories, you're probably not talking about fish as much. And it was but a moment in time that was just, awesome.
That's right. And in fact, at the start of this, I was thinking about, kind of, how do you catch a big redfish, or something like, but I mean, we haven't even talked about really, I mean, we've talked about the fishing, but you know what I mean? That hasn't even come up because really just getting your story of kind of what you do is always more interesting.
Right.
Than the fish. Well, I mean, obviously we're all here for the fish. I've had that question come up too a few times with guides where I say, yeah, is it, it seems like it's kind of half fishing, and half the experience, and sometimes you'll get a guide, they'll say, no, I'm 100%. It's about the fish. But what about for you? Is it sounds like the experience is about half for you. It's equal.
I mean, at the end of the day, I really want to catch the fish because I'm competitive and I feel like I'm losing if I don't, if I don't catch the fish. But it's also, there's so much more to it than that, that if that's always the straw that breaks the camel's back, then you're going to be disappointed probably, probably more times than you really should. So,
yep, definitely. Cool. All right, Caleb, well, I think we could leave it there. We'll send everybody out to talesofthetides.com, and if they have questions, they can check in with you. Also, where on social are you? Where's your best place you're most active out there?
I'm on Instagram, and that's cap.candrews.
Okay. Awesome, man. Well, we'll send people out there and definitely would love to stay in touch with you. Eventually get down in your neck of the woods. We'd love to get on the water. So, yeah, appreciate all your time, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Yeah, it'd be awesome. Thanks, Dave.
All right, call to action today. Check in with Caleb right now. You can go to talesofthetides.com. You can also check with him on Instagram and let him know you heard this podcast. And if you're down in that area or if you want to get into redfish, this is the trip to check out. We're definitely going to be hitting up Caleb as we move forward here and can't wait for that trip to South Carolina. Before we forget, don't forget to subscribe to this show, Apple Podcast. You can follow it there. However you get your podcast, whatever app you're on right now, Spotify, follow the show and you'll get that next episode delivered to your inbox. We got some good stuff coming. We've got another, not too far from this area in South Carolina, we've got another real Southern podcast episode coming up next week, so you don't want to miss that. Chad always brings his good stuff and a great episode. So check out the show there. And that's all I have for you today. I hope you have a great morning, a great afternoon, or a fantastic evening. And we'll see you on the next episode.